public utility. The internet should be a 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 public utility.
All right, like it said, the fight for municipal broadband, and we're going to take a swing at that tonight. We have two guests. On my far right, we have Garrett Auer, who's with Municipal Broadband PDX, and then Russell Sr. with a personal teleco project. And we're going to talk about net neutrality, and also we're going to talk about the local solution to that problem, and that is it's just to have a municipal broadband here in town. So I don't know that sounds really complicated to me, and I have issues with sometimes Portland, their water rates and all. So and on Facebook when I posted this, I had someone who's a very much Republican was saying, well, we can't have any of this stuff public. It has to be privatized, which it already is. So we're going to talk a lot about this in length, and welcome my guest. Thanks very much. I was in touch with Russell, and he brought. I'm in touch with Garrett, and he brought Russell along with him. I guess first I should ask Russell, what is the personal teleco project? The other one is pretty obvious.
Personal telco project. So we're a group of people who got started in the year 2000 with the idea that we were going to try to build alternative infrastructure for communications. And the way we were going to do that was to use what was very new at that time, which was Wi-Fi. You could, at that point, year 2000, you could go out to a store and buy a Wi-Fi radio, and maybe you'd build your own antenna, and you could make radio links and transmit data over that link. And what happened was that pretty quickly we discovered that Wi-Fi doesn't like to go through trees very well. And
there are a few of those around here.
There are a lot of trees in Portland, and what I like to say is there are tall trees and short houses. And so even if you get on your roof and you look around, if you want to go in any non-trivial distance, over a few hundred feet, you're going to run into a wall of trees. So the idea of trying to build in Portland, alternative infrastructure with Wi-Fi wasn't going to work, and we sort of mutated into building Wi-Fi hotspots to try to perpetuate the idea that that networking was a thing that users could respond to the users' needs rather than a big corporate ISP.
Would that be kind of like your low-powered FM that would just reach a certain amount of people in an area?
Basically. I mean, Wi-Fi will go a few hundred feet. If you open up a laptop at your house, you'll see a bunch of other people's networks.
Right.
And they're, within a few houses of you usually. And that's about the range of Wi-Fi, unless you get up really high and you've got a line of sight that is no obstacles in the way. You can take an antenna and aim it at that other thing, and they can aim something back at you, and you can go quite a long ways, but not if there are things in the way, and pretty much everywhere in Portland there are things in the way. So our group, although we play with Wi-Fi a lot, and we build networks with Wi-Fi to share with our communities, our neighbors, and people near businesses and so forth that have set up these networks. We're really fundamentally about networks that are operated in the interest of the users, and
to be more inclusive.
As a consequence, we've been interested in municipal or public involvement in telecommunications infrastructure pretty much from the get-go. And when back in 2007, the city staff worked on a plan to build a municipal fiber system in Portland and had a feasibility study. We were very excited about that and thought that they should go forward. But at the time, the city council thought, it was too risky, they thought. and they kind of put the kibosh on that, and it never went anywhere.
I can remember that.
And then just to fill in a little bit more of the history, in about 2010, Google Fiber came along and said, "Hey, we'll come build you a fiber network, and the city doesn't have to do anything other than create get rid of obstacles that would impair their ability to build the thing easily, and then you'll have competition," which was definitely a step in the right direction because we have extremely limited competition for telecommunication services in Portland. If you discount
most places,
yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah,
That's countrywide.
I think Comcast is like 40% of the market. At least
Well,
that's what they were a few years ago.
There are different cable companies, but almost never do they compete against each other. They have they don't have exclusive territory in the sense that the municipality says there can only be one, because that I believe is illegal now by federal law. But just from a business case point of view, you always end up with one cable provider because it's expensive to build the infrastructure, and you're going to get half the market for the same amount of capital.
We'll end up like with cell towers everywhere, like we do.
Right,
For cell phones.
Yes. So Google came along, and so there was some excitement about that at the time. One of the nice things about the original Google proposal was that they were going to build an open access network. And what that means is that they would build the infrastructure, the fiber or whatever it is, the stuff, the wires in the street, but that any service provider could provide services over that infrastructure. That's not the case with Comcast. It's not the case with the phone company. It used to be on old style DSL, you could pick different ISPs, but that's not the case anymore. One of the big problems is that the infrastructure owner can control who can provide services over that infrastructure. So if you connect to the cable, the coax cable going down your street, you have one choice for an ISP, and that's Comcast. And if you connect to CenturyLink's fiber or one of their fancier DSL connections now, you can only get ISP services from CenturyLink. And that's what they call vertical integration. They control the whole stack of services, from the content to the ISP to the infrastructure, and that gives them immense control over pricing. Gives them control with producers over it gives them pricing power to buy the content that they provide. So from a competition point of view, this vertical integration is horrible. Federal law gives the owner of the infrastructure that control. And my fundamental issue is that's horrible for the consumer. We need to get rid of that. And the only vehicle to do that right now is for the public to own the infrastructure, to build or purchase fiber infrastructure in the city, and then say it's going to be open access and allow any service providers access to that, and create a low barrier to entry. Anybody can basically have a pop-up service thing. Say they go down, they arrange for connection to the bigger internet, and say, hey, just connect to me. I'll charge you what it costs me, and so it puts a lot. It squeezes a lot of the margin out of the service portion of the price, which is a huge advantage for consumers. So my feeling is we need to have a municipal infrastructure, telecommunications infrastructure in Portland, to allow us to get to this state where we're not over a barrel all the time with the ISPs.
Well, that makes sense. And with Garrett, that kind of brings us up to the present time, where he was talking about they could pretty well, they meaning Comcast or whoever was in control of the pipe, and so to speak, in your area. We need to get around that. And it seems to me that this net neutrality is going further down that same road.
Oh, definitely. And that was a great history up until now.
It was. It's great. It clarified a lot of my questions I didn't even know I had.
Oh, yeah. Municipal Broadband, PDX, was an organization that rose from the ashes of net neutrality. that video was taken the week before net neutrality was repealed. And what I was saying there was, you know, this isn't the end. Net neutrality, the battle for the net does not end with the repeal of net neutrality. It's going to shift now from protecting this existing legislation, to which no longer exists, to pushing local governments to create their own internet infrastructure. And that's where we are right now. It's really the perfect city here in Portland. As Russell was saying, this is something we've been talking about for many years now, and it is clearly the time to act now that freedom of information and democracy itself is at risk. That is what the repeal of net neutrality means. It means a small handful of corporations has the ability to control what you see and do on the internet by blocking and slowing down content. And these are companies which have been lobbying against the interests of the American people for a very long time now. It's a small fraction of Americans who supported the repeal of net neutrality, and it's pretty easy to assume they didn't fully understand what that would mean. Unless you work for an ISP, there's no reason why you would.
Say, yeah. Yeah, that's pretty obvious, yeah.
And so if we do nothing here, it's not a matter of if they will use their newfound powers to manipulate the internet for political gain.
They're setting up to do it.
It's a matter of when, which is why we need to act now with this. So that's one side of things, is net neutrality. It's been talked about a lot. Something else that hasn't been discussed quite as much, especially recently, is the repeal of a central privacy regulation earlier this year, where the government cleared the way for internet service providers to sell information about what you do on the internet without your permission. So that is another tremendous risk that the American people are now open to, thanks to largely internet service provider lobbying. And really, this is the last line of defense for online privacy and freedom of information, is for us to build out our own infrastructure that we have control over.
Well, that makes sense to me. And, you know, I was doing some research regarding this issue. I didn't have a lot of time, but I did spend some time. And I come across a town in Tennessee that was trying to do what we're doing. And then a law was passed, I think, statewide to try to stop it.
They're trying to do that.
And that's, you know, they're not going to say, oh, you're going to have broadband. Well, we'll just figure out a way to do something else. They're going to go after this.
There are some states in the country have laws that constrain municipalities from building municipal networks. Oregon is not one of those states. There have been successful municipal networks all over the country. Some in North Carolina. There's a big, probably the most famous municipal fiber network is in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
So they've succeeded with that.
Oh yeah, yeah, that one, and it's everybody. You know, if you live in Chattanooga, you love it. Everybody I've ever heard of, you know, they love these things because they're cheaper, and they have some measure of control over how it's regulated. So there's success. They tend to be successful. Not all of them are successful. It's a capital-intensive thing to build a municipal network. You have to, you know, you pay people to string wires down streets, and that costs money just like anything else does, like pipes in the ground, your sewer pipes or your water pipes or the dam. But you know, they're investments that pay in the end. And I think, you know, I did a rough back of the envelope calculation that estimated that a lifetime of Comcast service was about $60,000 in today's, you know, right now. You could pay $60,000 and you would get Comcast for 50 years. But you can pay about $3,000 and build a whole fiber network, and then it's yours. So, you know, maybe I made little errors in some of those numbers, but it's like a 10 or 20 to 1 ratio.
Right.
So to me, it's like a no-brainer, super smart thing to do. And we haven't done it because our city councilors are scared, or you know, I don't know whether their political contributions change their opinions on things. I have no clue on that, other than they have not been responsive to this. They come up with excuses like, oh, it costs money, and you know, meanwhile we're shoveling. The citizens of Portland are shoveling $100 million out of the city every year.
Out of the state?
Well, out of just city of Portland. So $100 million that goes off to, you know, just Comcast. That's a rough guess, but, you know, from my information, that's approximately correct. So, you know, it's just, we're being strip mined here by a big corporation, and we don't have to be. We're allowing ourselves to be, and we shouldn't. We should stop.
Mm-hmm. I know it looked like Garrett was wanting to have something to say there too as well.
Yes, and until recently, this just hasn't been a hot issue in the city. It's not something that the people have stood up and said, we want this. Municipal broadband is something that we care about and that we need. And since the repeal of net neutrality, this is very much something that we're seeing. You saw that clip. We had a recent rally on the 14th that was focused on municipal broadband here in Portland. So it's something that, regardless, much like net neutrality, regardless of who you are, you should support municipal broadband. It makes sense from a financial perspective, it makes sense from an equity perspective, and it makes sense from a freedom of information perspective.
Absolutely.
Sure. Well, you mentioned cheaper. How much would it cost per month? Is that even
it's
projected?
hard. Well, so in 2007, they did a study and estimated costs, what it would take to build, and they had cost estimates for how much it would take to operate. And so 10 years have gone by, and so we really don't know. We can look at other communities that have done this and look at rates that they charge. There's a community just 30 miles east of here called Sandy, Oregon, where they built a municipal fiber network, and they get way better service than we do. Certainly way better than Comcast. It's 300 megabits symmetric. That's up speed and down speed.
Whereas here with Comcast, it's faster one way than the other.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. It's like, whatever you pay down, you still only have maybe 5 megabits or maybe 15 going up. So this is 300. So you can upload stuff. You can be a producer instead of just a consumer. They charge for that service $40 a month, and they borrowed $7 million and by issuing bonds, and they're collecting revenue from the people who subscribe and paying those bonds back over a period of years.
As opposed to like 60, I think, for Comcast, something like
or
that.
Even more,
or more, depending on what your situation is.
Which is another huge selling point to this, really, because as he was saying, the financial savings are huge when it comes to the service you'll be receiving and the cost you'll be paying for it, and it's not going to be funded through taxation. And I think that's an early objection that a lot of people have initially is, I don't want my tax money going to this. Well, it's not going to be funded that way, so we don't need to worry about that.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering about that. Another thing we're talking about, I go on the internet, is wireless. Why do they need to be stringing cables?
So wireless has substantial problems, one of which is it interferes with itself. There's a limited amount of radio spectrum, and you need that spectrum, the different channels essentially that you can use to send your wireless signals over. None of the wireless carriers, like on your cell phone, will sell you a really unlimited plan. They call them unlimited, but they put constraints on the amount of bandwidth that you can get through that thing. And so in the end, it's actually from your buying it perspective, way more expensive than what a wire is. If you want an unlimited plan from Verizon or whatever, it's like $60 or $80 a month, but it's not really unlimited. And anyway, you're back in the same situation where there's a few carriers that have all spent billions of dollars to get spectrum allocated to them. So there's not an opportunity for people to enter the market to compete. So there's continual consolidation, fewer carriers, and they get more and more control over how much you pay. Because, you know, everybody needs to communicate, and it feels like they've just got their fingers around your neck, and when they want more money, they just squeeze a little bit and more change falls out. Because you want to communicate.
It's a good image.
Yeah.
You need to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fundamental, you know, it's a fundamental human need to communicate. I mean, we could all go back and live in caves, you know, or in a, you know, out in the woods somewhere.
And grunt at each other.
And grunt at each other, and maybe, you know, you'll huddle together for warmth, and that's all the communication you need. But in today's society, we need to be able to communicate over distances, and, you know, politically, you need to be able to communicate to other people, you know, your ideas, and so, you know, you can have an exchange of ideas, and somehow you get some rational policy out of that. So yes, I totally agree. I mean, I've been yammering about the cost, and that's true. But obviously, the other thing is freedom, like you're saying. You know, that when they've got you, they can constrain what you can do. I mean, I'm kind of a nerd. I run servers, or I want to run servers that share information with people out on the internet. A lot of ISPs say, oh, you can't have servers, or you can't have an email server, or whatever. Well, I want one of those, and you're constraining my freedom by not letting me have that thing. So, you know, I say reduce the barriers and allow us to invest together communally in something that will save us all a lot of money in the end.
Well, Garrett, you've, like you say, you're a new group, but this fight isn't new. And what has been your experience with the city council? They're the ones that would have to allocate the money and the resources, I take it.
Definitely. So we are at a point where we're kind of focused on rallying the public. We're focused on showing them that this is something that the public really cares about and wants. And we're kind of going to be getting a beat on that in the next few months as to kind of where they're feeling, and you know, as they learn more about this too, because that's the thing. It's something that's been off the table for a while now. There's been a lot of new research done, and also, you know, the city's changed. The people's opinion on this has changed. So we're going to give them some time to kind of soak this stuff in before we really kind of come around again and try to get a feel on that.
I don't know if any of the folks that are on the council now were on it back in the days when you were dealing with it. Probably not.
Let's see.
Maybe one of them.
Yes, one of them. One of them that's leaving was there.
That's right.
Yes.
I forget.
I think pretty much the rest of them have turned over since
new.
then. You know, I've had conversations with a few of them in the past, and they've listened, but they haven't been willing to act. And so I mean, part of the reason we're here tonight and why we had the rally and, you know, is to raise awareness in the community and to put you know, some pressure on city council that this is a real problem. You know, there was the other analogy I like to use on the whole cost thing is there was a study done a while ago about how the impact of bicyclers in Portland, and one of the impacts is that they're not spending money on fossil fuels. People, every time you get on a bike and ride somewhere, that's, you know, a gallon of gas or something you're not paying for, that ships money out of the state where they generate, you know, they create the gasoline. The more we can avoid shipping money away, the more money we have locally to spend on, you know, making our economy better, hiring people, having, you know, restaurants or whatever. You know, there'll be more disposable cash in people's hands.
Sure. Well, you know, since public is the getting the public on board is the important part for this, at least on this early phase. I'm wondering, the only way the public's going to really get to know about it, other than a few that go to the websites and find out about your organization, is through the corporate media. And how has your efforts been covered, like at this rally and these different things? Have they been digging into it and really trying to find out what's going on?
Well, so far we had one major news station do some pretty nice coverage of it. I think they focused a little bit on the free aspect, because we do want it to be free for low-income people, but, you know, at cost to everyone else, because that's just how you would finance something like this. Of course, it's going to be much cheaper than what Comcast and CenturyLink are currently providing, regardless. But that was kind of the, but we had some great coverage. They focused on the idea that the internet is a utility, an essential one that we need in our everyday life. You can't apply for a job if you don't have access to the internet. You can't get essential information that you need to make decisions about who to vote for in an election. Mm-hmm. It's about democracy. It's about participating in our economy and our society. It's not something you can do without access to the internet. And we need to be treating it just the same as we treat things like water and electricity.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, you both have mentioned that in different ways. I know that I've had folks on here from Dignity Village and from R2D2 downtown, mm-hmm. and one of the first things they have to do when they start putting these people together, they need a place to stay and a place to stay warm and dry, but then they need to have a central area that has access to the internet.
Absolutely.
So they can go to work, or they
mm-hmm.
can find work, or they can connect with people. And this is probably, you know, up until just recently maybe it wasn't, but now it is pretty much right up there with shelter and mm-hmm. heat and water and food.
Yeah, it really is.
And whether or not people, I don't think people realize that yet. I never even put it in those terms yet, even though I'm involved with communication and media here. Maybe they don't need cable, but they definitely need to communicate with one another mm-hmm. somehow.
Yeah.
And that is a good way to go on about it. I see we're in almost halfway through. There's another little 4-minute clip I have up there that it demonstrates what this net neutrality was and what it isn't anymore. And we can just take off when we come back from that, because that's gonna kind of put another couple thoughts in your mind.
Does this bother you? What if you had to pay to make it go away? We often assume that all the information on the internet is equally accessible. It's not quite as simple as that, but this ideal is the basis of net neutrality. It's an issue that's been on the agenda in the US for years, but it actually affects people all over the world. Here's the problem. Without net neutrality, your internet service provider, or ISP, such as BT or Comcast, could influence what you see and how quickly you see it. In order for you to watch YouTube, browse Facebook, or read the news, you need an ISP to connect you to that content. Net neutrality demands that ISPs should treat all web traffic the same. Let's think about that in terms of real traffic. The ISPs are like the road between Tech City, where companies like Amazon and Google are based, and Consumerville, where you live. These companies have to send information along the road, which is owned by the ISP. Currently, vehicles from Google and vehicles from a small company travel on the same road at the same speed. The ISP cannot favor one over the other, so the Google van cannot overtake its competitor's little car. But imagine the road is converted into a highway with a fast and slow lane. To access the fast lane, companies have to pay the ISP more money. This favors big companies who can afford to pay. Some companies might even be denied access to the road altogether. It would be the ISP's choice. Without net neutrality, the ISP highway has stopped treating all traffic the same. What does this mean for you? Well, without net neutrality, you might find some services slow down unless your favorite sites pay the ISPs. This has happened before. In 2014, before net neutrality regulations were enshrined in law in the US, Comcast customers noticed Netflix streaming speeds plummeting. It wasn't until Netflix agreed to pay Comcast more money that streaming speeds shot up again. It could also lead to higher prices for you. ISPs could charge premium prices for people who want to watch a video or listen to music at peak times. And if companies are forced to pay for the fast lane, the price increase might be pushed back onto the consumer. That means you could end up paying more to browse your favorite sites. You might even notice a decrease in the quality of content. While larger companies can afford to pay up for better service delivery, smaller companies may not be able to keep up. Less competition means less pressure to improve products and services, and if smaller companies fold, the consumer will have less choice. ISPs could choose to slow down content of any kind. Let's take the business of streaming video. If Netflix makes an arrangement with an ISP, the ISP could block Netflix's competitors from reaching customers. Many ISPs have started their own streaming services. They could favor their own content and block competitors out completely. And it's not just about business. They could also censor content that they disagree with. ISPs argue that if there was less regulation and they were able to charge a premium for faster service, they could reinvest the money in better infrastructure. This could include improved access for people in remote and rural areas. If popular services like YouTube are putting more strain on the ISP's network, it makes sense for them to pay more anyway. Right? But YouTube would say it's not their job to improve the internet, just as it's not BMW's job to build better roads. What's more, many argue that any extra money paid to ISPs would really just go into the pockets of shareholders. One thing's certain, net neutrality creates a level playing field which spurs innovation. Small companies can easily challenge competitors, which motivates them both to improve their products. Small startups have a fighting chance to grow and even surpass their big rivals. That's how Facebook rose from humble origins in Mark Zuckerberg's university dorm room to domination over market leader MySpace. ISPs also argue that any consumers who don't like the way they operate can always choose to switch providers. But it's not that simple. Many people only have access to adequate broadband from one internet provider in their area. Without net neutrality, that one ISP could have a lot of control over what those consumers get to see online. So what do you think? Should net neutrality rules be protected, loosened a little, or even scrapped altogether?
What I think is they pretty much said what we said, but having it right there in visuals, much more powerful. And I'm glad we have both. I was thinking earlier that I can remember back in the early days, I wasn't necessarily aware of what was going on there though, but radio came out and people were saying, oh, this is going to make it much more wonderful for people. Corporations took over. TV happened, corporations took over and meted it out to us and charged us for it. Then cable came out. And now, you know, they're going down the same road for the internet. I understand that for TV and radio stations, they get a 5-year contract, and they're mandated to provide a certain amount of public information out, and they're not really doing it. So they're not doing it on that level like they're supposed to. You know, I don't have the words for that. Do you know what I mean there?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what's going on there now. You know, they're able to constrict the pipe, even though it's no longer a pipe or even a wire in some ways, and for this and take over this, and we will, you know, what's supposed to be freedom and democracy will no longer be freedom and democracy, and it has been that way. I mean, you know, like this rally you just did down there. How'd you get a hold of people to go there? You know,
exactly.
You know, and it's democracy is like tomorrow. I can make a quick plug for what's going on tomorrow. We got the Me Too March downtown. It's the 1-year anniversary of I worked this in cleverly. 1-year anniversary of Trump's inauguration, and everybody knows about it. I mean, there's 3,000 people considering going from the Facebook page. I mean, I've seen this before where I tried to go last year and I went down there late and I couldn't get across the bridges. So many people. Now, you know, people didn't call them up on the phone. You know, it wasn't that technology that brought this to things. So it's as we go down this road, the road should be getting wider, not narrower.
Agree.
And that's exactly what's going on there.
Definitely, and this is something which I always bring up because something that you sometimes hear is that there's so many other very important issues going on right now. Why is the internet something that we need to fight for? And that is precisely why. It is that the internet is this backbone, which is an incredible equalizer for our society. When you witness an injustice, so does the rest of the world. If you have a piece of information that you need to share, you're able to do that. Your ability to is not limited by, well, I guess it is to some extent, but the amount of money that you have. And that all goes away if we lose the internet as an open platform of communication. So our ability to fight for all of those other causes depends on the internet being open and free.
Coupled with cell phone technology, I mean, you know, the police probably hate it because what they do is right there, you know, and for a lot of different things. I mean, that you know, it's been years now, probably back in the days of the Portland occupation when I went down there and I had a video camera and I looked around. I was about the only one. Everybody had tablets and phones and all. That whole technology. I mean, overnight it seemed like it went away, and that's what you're working on, is providing a next stage. Both of you, I should say. And that next stage is Any idea how long something like this would take?
Well, so my feeling is, like I said earlier, that the plan that they have from 2007 needs to be revisited. There needs to be an effort to freshen that up, get better cost estimates of what it would take to build. That's likely to take, from the point where they decide to do that, it's like a year. And then organizing the construction is another few years before they could build something out. So, you're unlikely to get service from a municipal utility for communications before 3 years from now, but I don't think we should wait any longer than that. We need to start moving today.
How big is Chattanooga?
It's a little bit smaller. It's I'm wild guess it's like 100 or 200,000 people, something in that range. So Portland, some of the pushback on this has been, Portland would be the biggest city that's ever done this, and you're going to get all sorts of opposition from the telecommunication carriers, which is probably true. But they're some of the least popular organizations in the country. If you rank corporations by popularity, Comcast is near the bottom.
Right up near used car sales.
CenturyLink, also not very popular.
No.
I think they're being sued right now for misrepresenting billing practices, which I can testify to. So, them fighting us directly, publicly, I don't think is a huge problem because they're so deeply unpopular. Whether they can scuttle things more surreptitiously or not, I don't know. But the public needs to put pressure on our elected officials to say, hey, this is intolerable and we need to act. And I think if we do that, we'll get what we need.
One thing I was thinking about and wondering about there, Garrett, when we were talking is, we're saying Portland's going to do this, but you're not just going to stop it at the city limits. Is this going to be a metro area thing?
So this is something that we've talked about pretty extensively. And yes, expanding outwards is something that has
2.5 million people here in the metro area.
Yes, so expanding outwards from there is something that we have talked about. And this is kind of an adjacent topic, but this is about more than just our city. This has the potential to ignite a push for municipal broadband around the country. And it will be brought on very much by the repeal of net neutrality. That's the spark, because people aren't willing to have internet service providers control every aspect and sell information about what they do online.
Stuff they've been getting free basically all along.
It's as simple as that. People have kind of reached this point where they've had enough and they're going to be pushing for a change. So that's something that I hope internet service providers are prepared for.
Well, sometimes when you have a victory, it ends up being not a victory in the long run.
This will not be one for them.
You shine the light on things, and
so just as for the geographic scope question, there's the expression about think globally but act locally. I think it makes sense. I'm from Portland. I live in the city of Portland. I think they're the nearest public officials that can do something about this, and so that's why I'm particularly focused on Portland. It makes sense for other people too. They ought to be doing it also. There was a vote recently in Lake Oswego, for example, where I guess it lost. I don't remember how narrowly. I know the part of Lake Oswego that's in Multnomah County voted for it. So that's a point in our favor. I think if we could get this on the ballot, I think we'd have a good chance of showing, the elected officials that this is something we want.
Well, what ballot would that be on? A Portland ballot?
I guess initially, I don't know.
Because I don't know how that would work, because, Portland's got 3 different counties. So,
yeah.
So I know that complicates it.
There's jurisdictional things. Yeah,
that's what I mean, yeah.
And our initial strategy will be pushing City Council to act on this.
Yes.
And we are pretty confident that we will be able to show them that this is something that is something people want, and it's a good investment. It's a good long-term investment. We're talking a lot about the repeal of net neutrality here and how we need to get moving on this because the freedom of information is at risk. But that's kind of, you know, people might bring up, oh, well, you know, what if net neutrality is reinstated down the road? It's still a good investment.
Absolutely.
It's always going to make sense for our city, especially if it wants to be recognized as a tech city, if it wants to attract companies. It makes sense to build out municipal broadband.
You know, I was going to bring that up too, that there are a bunch of different states, or I don't know what all they're doing, but they are going after to reverse this. And I've signed a couple things on Facebook and through my emails where they're trying to get Congress to get they need 50 people to go up against it, and that's happening.
Yes. Now this particular move is very much kind of a strategy, at least it seems to be at this point, of getting Republicans on the record for this, getting them to vote against this initiative that the vast majority of Americans support. I don't actually think that it's going to be successful in reinstating net neutrality.
Giving them black eyes, is what you're saying.
Yes, exactly. We're going to have to, it's going to be a number of years without a doubt before we see any change there, I think. Yeah, so that's kind of how I view that. Yeah.
It's all right. Well, we got 15 minutes, 16 minutes left. We'll open up the phones. We didn't have them for a long time, so when we use them, bring them back on. Sometimes it's kind of slow, but hopefully folks will tune in. And I'm sure there's a lot of questions out there. I mean, I've had a lot of mine answered.
Looking forward to answering them.
And if we can't answer them, at least we know that that's an area you need to visit and get more information out.
So I've got a couple other points that involve, while we're waiting for
Sure, it takes a little while usually.
I have had several members of my family in public utilities. My father worked for the Bonneville Power Administration.
Oh, okay.
And my sister currently works for the City of Portland's Water Bureau. And you see, you know, what a public utility, how it's organized, and what its goal is, which is to provide a service at cost. That is, you know, they try to be, you can quibble about how frugal they are about certain things, but they're not taking big shovels of profit out of the thing in perpetuity. They're trying to provide a service. The Bonneville Power, you know, they built dams. They're paying bonds back to the federal government to help pay to construct the dams and the transmission systems and so forth. In exchange, we get cheap hydroelectric power in you know, a metropolitan area, and pay less for electricity than a lot of other places in the country. We've the cheap electricity for decades and decades employed lots of people here because there was cheap electricity. You know, the aluminum plants are mostly gone now, but when they were here, they were paying people good money.
Good money, right.
And likewise, there's the whole history of the Portland Water Bureau. You know, in 1880 or something, everybody was drinking out of puddles, you know, or the equivalent. And there were a few private water utilities, and people would get sick because, you know, there was horse manure going into the wells and stuff.
Everything, yeah.
And then eventually the city said, hey, this is intolerable, like now, and said, we're going to spend a big pile of money to build a dam up in the mountains.
And they did a hell of a good job doing that,
and they put big giant pipes that come all the way from the mountains.
Fed,
yeah. You know, almost no, you know, operating costs from there. You don't have to pump anything. You got the nice gravity going for you, and here we all get super great water here.
For the time, that was probably as much of an engineering feat as what we're talking about.
Yeah, you know, and thank goodness for engineers. They know how to do stuff. And as a result, the public invested in a thing, and we've been able to reap the benefit of that thing for decades and decades and decades. And you know, now we're going to spend, you know, for purposes we don't have full control over, we're going to build a filtration plant that's going to cost more than it would cost to build a fiber network in Portland. And we're all going to pay for that through our water bills.
And our city's been pushing it.
Well, the kind of, I mean, the EPA said, hey, you got these bugs in the water and you got to get them out and you need to build something to do that. So they've decided to do that thing. There may be some cheaper options, but, they fought it for years and years and they've finally, I guess, kind of given up. But the point is that we're building infrastructure to serve the public, to keep the public safe and to provide a good product, and the people who pay for that are going to be the ratepayers. And I think the model here is exactly the same. You build infrastructure and then you have the people who use that infrastructure pay for it, and they get a better deal in the end.
Mm-hmm. And this model really works, as a recent Harvard study has shown. A majority of municipal broadband networks provide people in their communities with internet that is faster and cheaper than what big cable companies have to offer. Additionally, I wanted to address one more thing, which is why can't localities police implement their own net neutrality laws? And the reason for that is, in the process of repealing net neutrality, because they kind of realized it wouldn't go over very well, big cable company, or the government, the FCC, has actually made rules against municipality, or against city and state governments creating their own regulation to properly police the internet, that is, their own local
yeah, the feds have preempted local regulation on most of this stuff when it comes to telecommunications. So they've all, in this sort of in the same breath of saying we're not going to regulate you, we're also saying we're not going to let any local municipality or state or whatever, any smaller level of government to regulate you either.
Didn't I read something about that? It had something to do with making it allowing or providing internet service on the cheap for people who are in poverty or don't have a lot of money. Is there anything like that going on? I read something, but I don't recall.
Well, I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to. There was a program with Comcast, I guess, where you could get, as part of a merger deal with the federal regulators, the regulators required Comcast to provide some $10 a month deal for people who could jump through 37 hoops. And from what I've heard of the people trying to jump through the hoops, it was never worth it by the time they got to the end.
Yeah.
And they're still making money off that.
Yes.
So we're talking about, it all gets down to money, right? I mean, that's what it seems like. And that's how the people who, whether it was the folks who were wanting to make the utilities, electric utilities, public. They always come back and say it was just going to cost you too much money. The same thing with labeling your GE.
They try to scare you.
And that's going to happen with this too.
Now that's actually an excellent point to bring up there, the electric takeover. Now, the key difference between that and this is people were receiving service that they were pretty comfortable with, and if they're in a position like that, they will be much more likely to just stick with what's safe because they're in a comfortable place. They're not when it comes to internet access.
Better safe than sorry. Huh?
Yes,
that's a human thing.
Well, they're not
sorry now.
Yeah, they're sorry and not safe when it comes to the service that companies like Comcast are providing. So they're looking for any other alternative, and the idea of municipal broadband is very popular because of that, and with good reason. The results are fantastic from what we've seen so far.
So you say that, I think it was, Russell, you said that Portland would be the biggest?
I think so. I may be wrong. There's a fantastic organization called the Institute for Local Self-Reliance that's in somewhere in Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul, somewhere. And they do lots of research about different communities around the country that have done this. Several years ago, there were 133 communities that had municipal broadband networks, and it's more than that now. I'm
all
sure.
Like Sandy, probably smaller.
They tend to be, because they run into fewer obstacles. They're like, you know, like as you were saying, you know, people are an ATM machine to these companies. And what they do with some of the money that they get is they spread it around to anybody in public office to curry favor. Comcast, since ORSTAR, which is the Oregon Secretary of State's office, it's campaign contribution database, since that started in, you know, about 10 years ago, Comcast alone has given almost $7 million to people running for office in Oregon. So they use the money that we give them to lobby our elected officials to act in their interest and not the public's interest. And, you know, I don't mind them giving the public officials money, but I do mind when the public officials act in their interest and not in ours.
And pretend that it's not bribery.
Exactly.
Yeah, so, you know, I was thinking when you were talking, I was thinking of all the corporate, the McDonald's and the Nike and all these things. They're out there pushing the people their direction too. So you can go for your lawmakers, but you can also kind of nudge the people too to make them think you're a great guy.
Well,
a corporate great guy.
One of the interesting things about this problem is that all businesses, except for Comcast and CenturyLink in Portland, are paying the same rate, you know, extortion that all of us the rest of us are. So this really cuts across, you know, business versus consumer, because all the businesses are getting raw deals also. So if, you know, if you're a small business or even a big business in Portland, this still makes a lot of sense. There are people, I heard stories about, you know, somebody like had an office building and they bought an office building or leased space in an office building across the street, and they couldn't get a network connection between the two buildings for less than huge number, you know, like $70,000, $100,000.
You can't get there from here.
You can't even get there, you know, when it's just across the street. That's ridiculous, and that should not be the case.
And that's kind of how the corporate world works. I mean, if they can find a way to, you know, whether it's cut off the pipe or to do whatever they can do to bring in the profits, they'll just say, well, you know, it's mandated by the government that we have to do whatever we can do. You know, the shareholders are kings. And that's not really the case. You know, that's not the case at all. We're down to a little over 4 minutes now. I think we might maybe do a little reiteration there, Garrett. What exactly is your organization about, and why is it doing it?
Municipal Broadband PDX is an organization dedicated to pushing for municipal broadband in Portland, Oregon. This is something we see as absolutely vital since the repeal of net neutrality has put our online freedom and privacy at risk. It's a fantastic investment for the city. It's something that we've done, that we should have done years ago, and it's something we've talked about doing for many years now. Yes. And now that the stakes are so high, it's something that I think that we should be moving forward with as soon as possible.
And Russell, your organization is going down the same road, but you're kind of taking a different tack, though.
Well, you know, the focus has always been in the same direction, and although we fiddle around with our little Wi-Fi toys and help people out in the near term, really the focus is on the long term and getting infrastructure that we can use, you know, in a more comprehensive way.
Well, another thing that struck my mind while we've been talking is I read something a while ago about, I think it was a woman down there in Grants Pass area that developed some kind of thing that she could put on her roof that could generate electricity, some kind of small windmill. And then that's when it first came to me to decentralize the energy grid. And that's basically what we're talking about here. Decentralizing it so you're not, you know, it isn't these big companies that control it all, but people can do it. You know, maybe it isn't the same as everybody generating their own electricity at their house, but at least on a citywide thing.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that to me is decentralization is really an important way to go, especially as we get more technologically tethered. That was a good word to me, because we are tethered to this. Well, all right, we got about almost 3 minutes left. Anything that we might have skipped that you want to bring out here?
Well, one big thing I wanted to say is anybody who's interested in getting involved in what we're doing, we have a Facebook page, which is kind of our primary community hub, which is Municipal Broadband PDX. If you look that up on Facebook, you can find that, as well as our website is municipalbroadbandpdx.org. And something we're going to be doing to help drive our message home is rallies in front of City Hall every single month. So the next one is going to be on the 13th of next month. So
the day
should
before,
be quite some fun, yeah.
The day before
Valentine's
Day. That makes it an easy one to remember.
Yep.
What day of the week is that?
So that's on a Saturday.
Saturday. Are they always on a weekend?
Yes, that's kind of when you get the best turnout for things like this.
Right, right. And all right, that's good to know, because the situation is going to take a lot of pushing by a lot of people.
Oh yeah, and we're going to keep pushing. And that's our goal with this, is to just be persistent, keep it fun, keep the public engaged.
All right. Anything that I mean, you could go on and on with this
on
the technology of this stuff.
It's
that
like
just fascinates me
It's
too.
like streets. It's just infrastructure, but we need public own. You know, you don't have car companies owning streets and deciding what cars can drive on that street.
That's a great analogy.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's exactly what it is too. And I think people are busy. They live their lives. They have their children. They have their internet. They have their TV. They have all this, but they don't think about what they have now isn't going to remain the same. It's going to go down the road, and this repealing of net neutrality is a really good example of how things don't stay the same, and they can get worse if they don't get better. They're not going to be just the way they were. And it's great that folks like you both that are working on this, and you're both working from different areas towards the same thing, and that's what it's going to take. And as you said, both of you have said that, and we talk a lot about it on this program, it's basically not the people here that are going to do it, it's the people out there that are going to do it.
Oh yeah.
And we got to have large numbers, and perhaps in the long run this net neutrality is going to be, the spark.
I think it will be.
The shot heard around the world, or at least heard around this country anyway.
I think that the lobbying for the repeal of net neutrality will be the worst mistake these companies ever made.
Mm-hmm. And they've made a bunch.
Oh, they certainly have.
All right. Well, I want to thank the crew for making this possible for us, bringing the video up on time, and all that. I want to wish we'd have had some calls, but I guess we covered the subject pretty well. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Night for now.